Guest joining us in studio today. We haven't seen him in about a month. Jeremy Daly is a physician assistant at Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. He's joining us today on Better Health. And Bill Cowley as well, answering the telephones at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. First of all, Jeremy, welcome back.
Thanks. Good to be here.
I was going to say long time no see.
It has been a while.
Yeah. The rotation came up, though, today, and you're today's starting pitcher. So that's a good thing. Off the top, we were just talking briefly off air. You're talking about thyroid issues today, and I mentioned I've known a couple of people who've had issues with that. I don't know if we've gotten better at diagnosing this, or have we had an increase in people with thyroid issues, cancers, and other problems over the last several years. Is there any way to really figure that out?
Yeah, it's interesting because historically, thyroid disease was actually a lot more prevalent. And when we look at the history of the United States, in fact, there was a big group of people in the Great Lakes areas in the 1920s that were severely hypothyroid. They had too low of thyroid hormone in their bodies, and they called it the thyroid belt. And that's one of the reasons that we actually started to iodize salt and flour in the United States, is because of that large population of the U.S. being diagnosed with hypothyroidism as a result of iodine deficiency.
So it may have been just something in their own diets that they lacked, right?
Exactly, and the key component there is iodine. And once we started to add iodine to the salt, we have iodized salt nowadays, and historically it was in flour. They don't do that anymore, but we still have iodized salt on the shelves today, and most salt shaker salt is iodized, and that's one of the main reasons that we iodize the salt.
How important is the thyroid? I mean, what is its job really in the human body?
It's a great question. So it actually is key to our whole metabolism. When the thyroid is not functioning, then we see a really huge decline in the way people feel as far as energy levels. Weight gain is a really common symptom. Usually, 10, 15 pounds of weight gain. We see people have changes in their mood. People tend to feel a little bit more depressed when they're having low thyroid levels. Their digestive system slows down. We see skin, hair, nail changes where they become more brittle and dry. So there's a large amount of things that change when the thyroid isn't doing its job.
Now, there are treatments, right? If somebody has a thyroid that's underperforming, that obviously will probably work very, very well.
Oh yeah, it's really just one, figuring out that it's actually not working, because a lot of people, they come in, they say, I'm fatigued. I have a sister or my mom has hypothyroidism, and they usually say low thyroid or thyroid problems. But we can do a quick blood test, and we usually get the results back within 24 hours, and we can say you are or you aren't having problems with your thyroid, and if they are, then it's usually just replacing the hormone that's missing.
Now, is there a hyper version as well where it overperforms?
Yeah, there is actually. It's a little bit more rare, but some people know it as Graves' disease. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah, and Graves' disease is one of those diseases that has a few hallmark features that people can recognize very easily if they're looking for it. One of those features is called exophthalmosis, and basically what that is protrusion of the eyes. So eyes start to kind of work their way out, and they look like they're bulging. And so that's one of the first features that people start to see. Weight loss is very common with that. Feeling like you're always warm, or everyone else around you is okay temperature wise, and you're feeling like you're always sweating and warm, and feeling things like palpitations, your heart's beating too fast. So those are some of the really key components. Weight loss is a big one, and high energy levels. So sometimes people aren't, they don't like to find out that a disease is causing them to have all that energy. So it's tough for people actually sometimes.
A lot of people out there probably, though, when they have some of these features, symptoms, they today they go to the internet and they start looking things up. But these could be symptoms of a number of things, not just hyper or hypothyroidism. And probably your recommendation is Don't self-diagnose. Have somebody in the medical business take a look at you.
Yeah, yeah, I think that that's almost always the case because you can go to places like WebMD and do a what they call a symptom check around there, and by the time you narrow it down to 3 or 4 diagnoses, it's at least cancer. One of them is at least cancer, and the other ones are usually what we call zebras, things that you don't see very often in the medical field. And so people they come in really concerned about these particular diagnoses, and
Overstressing, maybe.
yeah, exactly. When it takes a short consult and we talk about some of the things that they're dealing with and do a quick blood test a lot of times, and we can put their mind at ease.
We've got more coming up with Jeremy Daly. He's a physician assistant at Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls, Idaho. He'll be with us until 9 o'clock this morning, and we're talking about thyroid issues today. And if you've got a question or comment, feel free to give us a shout after the break. The telephone number, if you haven't jotted it down yet, I think most of you have, but it's 7360300. And we'll have more coming up in just a couple of minutes. Right now, it's 8:40 and it's 54. Bill Colley with you as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're talking better health with Tripp Family Medicine today. Jeremy Daly, physician assistant, in the studio with us. We have a caller, and caller, I'll get to you in just a moment. I just wanted to point out we're talking about thyroid issues. Telephone number is 7360300. That's 7360300. And caller, thank you for your patience. You're up next. You're on the air.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, I know you're talking about thyroids, but Dr. Jeremy just happens to be my doctor, and he'll know who this is because I got nothing but love for Tripp Family Medicine. They helped me out in a situation where I was having stroke symptoms, and I just wanted to let everybody out there know that, Dr. Jeremy, I really, really love you, man. You
Yeah.
helped me out. He knows who it is because he's a secret Raider fan. So I was just at the office and talking to the ladies, and they told me that you was on the air, and I just had to call, and everybody should go see Tripp Family Medical. They're the best. Probably saved my life. So,
Hey,
Dr.
love you, buddy.
Jeremy, Dr. Jeremy, I love you, man.
Hey, love you too.
Isn't that a great testimonial?
I appreciate it.
We don't get those often enough. And we were talking during the break about different thyroid issues, and you mentioned that sometimes it's genetic. Sometimes, though, on the other hand, if you see it across an entire group of people, a family, and sometimes they're not all related in that family, but it can be some other issue because we have a lot of blended families now. So if you've got 6 people and 3 are a genetic match and 3 aren't, and yet the issue is still there, there's another issue that's going on here.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thought of iodine deficiency, and some of the recent research that I've read suggests that over the last 30 to 40 years, we're seeing a decline in iodine intake, and some of that could be related to sodium intake. We've been telling people for years, don't salt your food with a salt shaker. Keep the sodium levels down, and that's true for a lot of people, especially if you have high blood pressure. Then we want you to be really conscientious of sodium intake. However, a lot of people aren't getting sufficient amounts of iodine on a regular basis. So, salt that's iodized is a great way to get it. Other sources are things like seafood tends to have it. Dairy products tend to have iodine in them. And so if you're not eating a lot of those types of foods, there's a chance that you could be deficient in iodine. That being said, in the US, it's really a rarity that we find people that are iodine deficient, and that's the cause of the hypothyroidism. Seems to be the biggest cause is what's called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune disease where the body essentially attacks the thyroid and renders it useless. It's not able to function anymore and create the hormones that we need, specifically T3 and T4, the names of the hormones.
Got to be difficult for people because we have had that message for 30 to 40 years to reduce salt intake, but there's obviously a proper level, but it's not necessarily, I might have a different proper level than you would, let's say, and it's going to differ from person to person. So we really don't have you can't go in and sit down at a restaurant, look at a sheet that says, have this much. there's nothing like that available. So it's really just guesswork on the part of most patients.
Yeah, it is. There's some ranges that we recommend as far as sodium levels go for people. Um, Try to reduce levels in people who are having high blood pressure problems to between 1,500 and 2,000 milligrams of sodium a day. But I was mentioning earlier that there's some recent research on sodium that suggests that unless you have a problem, there's no real big need to reduce sodium intake overall. Um, that being said, if you're starting to notice that you're swelling or retaining fluid or things like that, then you're probably overdoing it. And some people will feel that after like a real salty meal, say like a Thanksgiving dinner where they have things like turkey and ham that tend to be quite salty. They can feel that they retain a little bit of fluid, and you're probably overdoing it if you're feeling that. But most of the time, if you're just you're conscientious of how much you're eating, uh, portion wise, and you're not over salting things, you're probably going to be okay.
How common is, I mean, is the thyroid issue in this country?
So some of the statistics say that it's about 2 to 4% of the population that deal with thyroid issues. Um, that being said, it really is more common in women. It's about a 10 to 1 ratio women to men. So it's far more common in women. And so we typically think when women come into the clinic, we have a couple of things that we think of when they're saying I'm fatigued, I'm not feeling right, I'm just feeling like I can't catch up. We think, it could be anemia. That's a real common cause of those symptoms in women, but definitely thyroid disease is within our differential diagnosis there.
I, I, you mentioned that I've only known two people who've had an issue with it where they've had to have it removed, and they were both women. That's a low figure, and that's not a good sample size to make any conclusions out of that. But what happens to people after they actually have to have that done? Because obviously it's a terribly important part of regulating our daily lives. And when it's gone, how do people actually make up that? How do you replace that?
Yeah, essentially it's kind of the same thing as what I mentioned earlier, the Hashimoto's thyroiditis, where the even though you have a thyroid gland present still, because your body's attacked it and destroyed the functional cells of the thyroid, it's useless. So when women have, or men for that matter, when they develop problems like thyroid cancer, or they have Graves' disease where you have an overactive thyroid, then and it needs to be removed at some point. We treat it the same. We give a supplement of a medication called levothyroxine. Synthroid is the trade name for it, and that's the most common treatment for it. There's all sorts of others. There's something called Armour Thyroid, and basically different formulations, but essentially it's the same thing. It's replacing those hormones in the body.
When we hear the word cancer comes up, and you mentioned earlier that you don't want to frighten people or make them too stressful. But as cancers go, how does this compare? I mean, if someone obviously has pancreatic cancer, that's a very serious thing. But is thyroid cancer considered to be as serious?
Not No, compared to pancreatic cancer, definitely not. I mean, cancer is not good no matter where it's at, and any cancer left um, undiagnosed or untreated for a long period of time can be essentially deadly. It can spread, but most of the time with thyroid cancers, they're well contained, and if we diagnose them early, and most people will notice a difference. In the front of their neck is where the thyroid gland sits, so just below the Adam's apple or the Eve's apple, if you will, just below the neck
Got
there.
to be fair there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Um, then if you feel like a hard knot or a lump, something that maybe feels like a rock or a marble, then it needs to be checked out. And we can ultrasound those, and sometimes we'll even do a biopsy after we do an ultrasound, and that helps us to diagnose whether or not it's just a thyroid nodule, which isn't anything that needs to be removed, or a thyroid cancer.
Sometimes, and I assume that there's issues with the thyroid that are not related though to cancer, but there could be other things growing there. People have had fatty tumors. Obviously, would I don't know that you'd see one there, but have there been other issues where something impacts on it and it creates the hypo or hyper situation.
So like another tumor or something in the area that maybe
Right,
reduces
something in
blood
the
supply.
area. Yeah.
There's always a chance there could be. That's not anything that I've seen a lot clinically or at all clinically. I mean, sometimes people will get other neck masses, and there's a chance that they could cut off blood supply to the thyroid. Probably the other thing that we see really commonly is, well, not commonly necessarily, but is definitely within the realm of possibility, is changes in the pituitary gland in the brain. That's where one of the thyroid hormones come from as well. It's kind of like the beginning of the actual production of thyroid starts in the brain. It's a signal that tells the thyroid to get to work. And sometimes when the pituitary gland has a tumor, or sometimes women will have damage to the pituitary gland after pregnancy or giving birth. Um, we can see hypothyroidism result because of changes in the pituitary gland in the brain. So it, it's it is a complex um, process as far as how the whole thyroid system works. We kind of focus on some of the basics because those are the things that we see more commonly, but there are other varieties of causes.
It's 8:53. Jeremy Daly, physician assistant, is our guest from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. We should point out, located on Fillmore Street on the north side of the city, directly across from the main post office, and still looking for new patients. What's the telephone number if someone has a need to find someone to take care of them?
It's 933-4400. And yes, we're happy to take new patients. We love meeting new people and having new people come into the office, and we really pride ourselves on making people feel like they're in a comfortable environment, from the front desk staff all the way to the back. We really pride ourselves on taking care of people.
Dr. Tripp has mentioned in the past that he has some background in cosmetic areas. The one thing I've noticed with people who've actually had to have thyroid removal or surgery done is that the scar is very visible. I've got a scar on my back where I had some surgery done. No one can see that. It's always covered up under a shirt. But if you're walking around in public, it's very difficult to cover that scar right at the bottom of your throat. So there's a lot of folks out there, I'm sure, are very concerned about that. Because it becomes more of a our health is all intertwined, right? So mental health, wellness, and everything else has to feed into this or factor into this at some point too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We worry about that, and really, it's difficult sometimes to reduce scars or prevent scars from happening, especially in that area. The surgeons that take those out, they do their best to reduce scarring and reduce problems with the skin in that area. But sometimes the best thing you can do um, is just not irritate it too much. Sometimes we'll recommend putting things like vitamin E oil on it or olive oil just to keep it moist as it heals, and that will allow it to kind of soften and not be such a really fibrous scar. Sometimes if a scar is really, really prominent, we'll do injections on it just to reduce um, the inflammatory look to it, and it will make it look a little bit more flat and not so visible. So there are things that we can do cosmetically to reduce scarring when it comes to like a thyroid excision.
I know a lot of people I've seen who've gone through this. They wear a lot of sweaters or other. They wear the clothing to try to cover it up. But from my perspective, it's not really very noticeable. We tend to notice things more on our own bodies, I think, than family or friends would notice them.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of the nature of being people. We tend to be self-conscious about things that other people really don't care about, and it is understandable, and you know we have to think of it from a perspective of a scar is not ever something that we want to have, but in the grand scheme of things, if that scar allows us to live a healthy life and basically prolong our life, then I would say it's worth it in most cases. So it's kind of the cost benefit analysis of having the scar versus a disease process. So it's it's a tough thing, but at the same time, it's amazing. I think that we can take care of those things, and people can live long, happy, healthy lives because of modern medicine.
You mentioned how people are attuned to their own more so because you're looking at yourself in the mirror every day. the old Andy Rooney joke was, we all think we look different with our glasses on, but he said, your family and friends think you look the same with or without them.
I think that's exactly right.
So we want to point out quickly again the contact information at the office.
Yeah, so come see us at 1411 Fillmore, across from the post office. You can get a hold of us at 933-4400, and come see our Facebook page. Get to know a little bit about our office and some of the people that work there. We try to post information about all of our staff. You know, we love our staff, so we're happy to talk about them and brag about them.
And I always would have thought that Jeremy Daly would have been a Denver Broncos fan, but
I don't know about the closet Raiders fan, but for him, I think I will.
yeah, well, Jack Del Rio's a good guy.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he certainly got a lot of guts when it comes to certain play calls. We had a guest yesterday, by the way, in studio in the second hour of the program who was not a Broncos fan. And I asked one day, and he told me because John Elway is insufferable. So I guess that answers that question, why people might have different tastes in football. But anyway, I want to thank you for coming by today.
Good to be here.
Don't be a stranger. We'll see you again soon.
That sounds great.
We've got 9 o'clock news on the way in just a moment. Bill Colley with you too as well. On News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 1 hour of our program still ahead. Just after the news at 9 o'clock, we'll be joined by Lee Stranahan. He's working with a local community group that hopes to make some changes here in our community, here in Twin Falls. That's on the way in just a few minutes.